Sarah stared in horror at the freshly dug-up garden beds, the once vibrant flowers and herbs now lying lifeless. Her heart raced as she spotted the familiar logo of the HOA. They had gone behind her back and destroyed her carefully tended oasis. But as the police arrived and the city forensics team began their investigation, a terrifying truth emerged. The HOA had used illegal pesticides, unleashing a toxic threat that put the entire neighborhood at risk. The battle for justice was on. Sarah collapsed to her knees, tears streaming down her face as she surveyed the devastation. Her pride and joy, the lush garden she had poured her heart into, lay in ruins. The neatly tended beds had been ripped up, the vibrant flowers and herbs replaced by an unsightly expanse of bare earth. "How could they do this?" she whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of disbelief and rage. Sarah had fought tooth and nail with the homeowners association to keep her garden, but they had always viewed it as an eyesore, an unruly mess that disrupted the pristine, uniform aesthetic they demanded. Just yesterday, she had received the final warning: remove the garden or face hefty fines. But Sarah refused to back down. This was her sanctuary, her oasis of calm in a world that often felt overwhelming. She had poured her heart and soul into nurturing this little slice of nature, and she'd be damned if she let the HOA take it from her. "Ma'am, we've secured the scene," a deep voice called out, snapping Sarah from her reverie. She looked up to see a police officer standing over her, his face etched with concern. "Can you tell me what happened here?" Sarah quickly recounted the events, her voice rising with each word. "The HOA. They did this. They came in the middle of the night and destroyed my garden. I knew they were threatening me, but I never thought they'd stoop this low." The officer frowned, his brow furrowed. "We've called in the city forensics team. They'll be here shortly to investigate." He paused, his gaze softening. "I'm sorry this happened to you, ma'am, but we'll get to the bottom of this, I promise." As the officer stepped away to confer with his colleagues, Sarah's mind raced. She knew the HOA was ruthless, but this was a new low, even for them. And as the full implications of what had happened began to sink in, a cold realization gripped her. If the HOA had resorted to such drastic measures, there was no telling what else they might be capable of. Sarah clenched her fists, her resolve hardening. She wouldn't back down, not this time. This was war, and she was determined to win. The arrival of the city forensics team set the scene into motion. Sarah watched intently as the specialists combed through the decimated garden beds, carefully collecting samples and documenting their findings. The air was thick with tension as they worked, their expressions grave. After what felt like an eternity, the lead forensic investigator approached Sarah, his face etched with concern. "Ma'am, we've discovered traces of a highly toxic pesticide in the soil. It's not something that would be commonly used in a residential garden." Sarah's heart sank as the implications hit her. "You're saying the HOA used illegal chemicals to destroy my garden?" The investigator nodded solemnly. "That appears to be the case. We'll need to conduct further testing, but the evidence strongly suggests a deliberate and malicious act." Sarah's hands trembled as she processed the news. The HOA had willingly put the entire neighborhood at risk, all to get their way. Her initial shock quickly gave way to a burning fury. "This is unacceptable," she exclaimed, her voice rising. "They can't just come in and poison my garden, endangering everyone around here. There have to be consequences for this." The investigator raised a hand, attempting to calm her. "We understand your anger, ma'am. Rest assured, we take these kinds of violations very seriously. We'll be working closely with the police to build a case and ensure the responsible parties are held accountable." Sarah took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. "Good, because I'm not going to let them get away with this. Not this time." As the forensic team continued their investigation, Sarah's mind raced with a swirling mix of emotions. She was furious, yes, but beneath the anger, a glimmer of determination had been kindled. This was no longer just about her beloved garden. It was about standing up to the HOA's blatant disregard for the safety and well-being of the entire community. Sarah clenched her fists, her resolve hardening. She would fight this battle, no matter the cost. The HOA had finally gone too far, and she was ready to take them down. As the city forensics team continued their meticulous investigation, Sarah knew she couldn't sit idly by. The HOA's actions had put the entire neighborhood at risk, and she was determined to hold them accountable. Rushing home, Sarah feverishly began digging through old files and documents, searching for any evidence that could help build a case against the HOA. She knew they were a formidable opponent, with deep pockets and a reputation for ruthlessly defending their interests. But Sarah was no stranger to a fight. She had battled the HOA tooth and nail over her garden, and she wasn't about to back down now. This was personal, and she was ready to do whatever it took to ensure justice was served. After hours of scouring through paperwork, Sarah let out a triumphant gasp. Buried in the fine print of the HOA's bylaws, she had uncovered a glaring loophole. A clause that explicitly prohibited the use of any hazardous chemicals or substances within the community without prior approval. "Gotcha," she muttered, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. With this ammunition in hand, Sarah knew she had the HOA on the ropes. Wasting no time, she hurried to the police station, determined to share her findings and expedite the investigation. As she recounted the details to the detective overseeing the case, his eyebrows shot up in surprise. "This is exactly the kind of evidence we need to build a solid case," he said, nodding approvingly. "We're already piecing together the timeline and tracing the source of the illegal pesticides. With your information, we should be able to move forward quickly." Sarah felt a surge of relief wash over her. Finally, the tables were turning, and the HOA was the one facing consequences. She knew it wouldn't be an easy battle, but she was more than ready to put up a fight. As the detective outlined the next steps in the investigation, Sarah's mind raced with a mix of emotions. Anger at the HOA's callous disregard for the community's safety. Determination to see this through and ensure they were held accountable. And a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, she could finally win this war and reclaim her beloved garden. One thing was certain. Sarah was done playing by the HOA's rules. This time, she was going to write her own. As the investigation into the HOA's illegal pesticide use gained momentum, Sarah found herself thrust into the spotlight. Local news outlets had caught wind of the story, and suddenly, her fight against the Homeowners Association had become a rallying cry for the entire community. Reporters clamored for interviews, eager to shine a light on the David and Goliath battle unfolding in the quiet suburban neighborhood. Sarah, once a private person who preferred to stay out of the limelight, now found herself at the center of a media frenzy. "This is about more than just my garden," she told one reporter, her voice filled with conviction. "The HOA's actions put all of us at risk. They have to be held accountable, and I'm not going to stop until justice is served." Her words struck a chord with the community, and soon, Sarah found herself surrounded by a growing army of supporters. Neighbors who had once been indifferent or even wary of her garden now stood beside her, outraged by the HOA's blatant disregard for their safety. Together, they organized protests, wrote letters to local officials, and flooded social media with calls for accountability. The pressure on the HOA was mounting, and Sarah could see the cracks beginning to form in their once impenetrable facade. But as the public outcry continued to swell, the HOA dug in, doubling down on their efforts to discredit Sarah and her supporters. They hired high-priced lawyers, unleashed a barrage of legal threats, and even attempted to turn the community against her. "She's just a troublemaker, trying to stir up trouble," one HOA board member declared in a televised interview, his face a mask of disdain. "This garden was an eyesore, and we had every right to remove it. The safety concerns are just a smokescreen." Sarah's jaw tightened as she watched the interview, her hands clenching into fists. The HOA was pulling out all the stops, and she knew she had to be prepared for an all-out war. But as she looked around at the growing crowd of supporters, a newfound sense of determination took hold. This was no longer just her fight. It was the community's fight. And she had no intention of backing down, no matter how fierce the opposition became. As the battle with the HOA raged on, Sarah found herself caught in a whirlwind of activity. The media attention had brought a constant stream of reporters and camera crews to her doorstep, all clamoring for the latest updates on the scandal. Meanwhile, the city's investigation continued to uncover damning evidence against the Homeowners Association. Forensic reports detailed the dangerously high levels of toxic pesticides found in the soil, and investigators traced the supplies back to a shadowy supplier with connections to the HOA board. "This goes all the way to the top," the lead detective told Sarah, his expression grim. "We're talking about a widespread conspiracy to destroy your garden and put the entire community at risk. It's going to be a tough case to build, but we're not going to back down." Sarah's heart swelled with a mixture of relief and determination. Finally, the truth was starting to emerge, and the HOA's underhanded tactics were being exposed for all to see. But she knew the fight was far from over. The HOA, sensing the walls closing in, had launched an all-out PR offensive. They flooded local media with statements denouncing Sarah as a delusional troublemaker, and they mobilized their supporters to stage counter-protests and bombard officials with calls and emails. "She's just trying to make a name for herself at the expense of our community," one HOA representative declared in a scathing op-ed. "This garden was nothing but an eyesore, and we had every right to remove it. Now she's gone and dragged us all into this mess." Sarah gritted her teeth as she read the article, her anger boiling over. The HOA was pulling out all the stops, resorting to blatant lies and character assassination in a desperate attempt to save their own skin. But Sarah refused to be cowed. She held her head high as she addressed the growing crowd of supporters gathered outside her home, her voice ringing with conviction. "They can say what they want, but the truth is on our side. The HOA broke the law, and they put all of us at risk. And we're not going to stop until they're held accountable." The crowd erupted in cheers, their fists pumping the air in solidarity. Sarah felt a surge of pride and determination. This was no longer just her fight. It was a fight for the entire community, and she was more ready than ever to take on the HOA, no matter the cost. As the battle against the HOA intensified, Sarah found herself thrust into the unexpected role of community leader. Her once private fight had become a rallying cry for the entire neighborhood, and she found herself at the center of a growing grassroots movement. Crowds of supporters flooded the streets, holding signs and chanting slogans in support of Sarah's cause. Local businesses offered their storefronts as makeshift headquarters, providing a space for the community to organize and strategize. Sarah found herself juggling interviews, coordinating with lawyers, and rallying her neighbors, all while trying to maintain a sense of normalcy in her own life. The strain was starting to show, but she refused to back down. "This is bigger than me now," she told her husband one evening, as they lay in bed, the sounds of the ongoing protests drifting in through the open window. "The HOA's actions put everyone at risk, and I can't just sit by and let them get away with it." Her husband nodded, his expression grim. "I know, honey, and I'm with you, every step of the way. But you've got to take care of yourself, too. This is a fight that's going to take everything you've got." Sarah squeezed his hand, drawing strength from his unwavering support. "I know. But I can't turn my back on this, not when so much is at stake. The community is counting on me, and I refuse to let them down." As the investigation continued to uncover more damning evidence against the HOA, the pressure on the Homeowners Association mounted. Their PR campaign had started to crumble under the weight of the truth, and Sarah could sense the tide turning in her favor. But with every victory came new challenges. The HOA fought back with renewed vigor, filing legal motions, launching counter-investigations, and even attempting to have Sarah and her supporters arrested for trespassing on their property. Sarah gritted her teeth, her determination unshaken. She knew this was a battle she couldn't afford to lose, not when the safety and well-being of her entire community hung in the balance. "They're not going to scare me off," she declared to the crowd of supporters gathered outside her home. "This fight is far from over, but I promise you, we're going to see it through to the end." The crowd erupted in cheers, their voices filled with a newfound sense of hope and resolve. Sarah felt a surge of pride and purpose wash over her. This was her fight, but it had become so much more. It was a fight for the future of her community, and she was determined to emerge victorious. As the legal battle with the HOA raged on, Sarah found herself in the unexpected position of being a media darling. Her steadfast determination and unwavering commitment to her community had captured the attention of reporters and news outlets nationwide, and she was suddenly thrust into the national spotlight. Interviews, talk show appearances, and even a feature in a high-profile magazine, Sarah's face and story were everywhere, her fight against the HOA becoming a symbol of the struggle against corporate greed and community corruption. But with the increased attention came new challenges. The HOA, sensing that the tide was turning against them, began to ramp up their efforts to discredit Sarah. They launched a relentless smear campaign, flooding the airwaves and social media with allegations of her being a troublemaker and a publicity hound. "This is all about her own ego," one HOA board member declared in a heated interview. "She's not interested in the good of the community. She just wants to make a name for herself, no matter who she has to drag through the mud." Sarah gritted her teeth, determined not to let the HOA's tactics get to her. She knew the truth was on her side, and she was more determined than ever to see this fight through to the end. "They can say what they want, but the facts speak for themselves," she told a reporter, her voice steady and unwavering. "The HOA broke the law, and they put my entire community at risk. I'm not going to back down, no matter how much they try to smear me." As the legal proceedings continued, Sarah's supporters rallied around her, organizing massive rallies and flooding the local government with calls and letters demanding justice. The pressure on the HOA was mounting, and they were starting to show cracks in their once impenetrable facade. And then, just when it seemed like the tide was turning in Sarah's favor, a shocking new development emerged. The HOA had filed a countersuit, accusing Sarah and her supporters of trespassing and vandalism. "They're trying to bury us in legal fees and red tape," Sarah's lawyer explained, his brow furrowed in concern. "It's a desperate move, but it could still set us back significantly." Sarah felt a surge of anger and frustration. Just when she thought they were close to victory, the HOA had thrown another curveball. But she refused to be deterred. "We're not going to let them win," she declared, her eyes blazing with determination. "We've come too far to give up now. This fight is far from over." As the legal battle with the HOA reached a fever pitch, Sarah found herself at the center of a whirlwind of activity. The countersuit filed by the Homeowners Association had thrown a wrench into the proceedings, forcing her and her team of lawyers to scramble to mount a defense. The pressure was mounting, both physically and emotionally. Sarah found herself juggling media interviews, community rallies, and countless hours spent poring over legal documents, all while trying to maintain a sense of normalcy in her personal life. But through it all, her resolve never wavered. She was more determined than ever to see this fight through to the end, no matter the cost. "They're not going to break me," she told her husband one night, as they sat together on the porch, the sounds of the ongoing protests drifting in from the street. "I've come too far to give up now." Her husband squeezed her hand, his eyes filled with a mix of pride and concern. "I know, honey. But you've got to take care of yourself, too. This fight is taking a toll, and I don't want to see you burn out." Sarah nodded, her gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "I know. But I can't back down, not when so much is at stake. This is about more than just my garden. It's about holding the HOA accountable for their actions and protecting our community." As the legal battle dragged on, the community's support for Sarah only continued to grow. Rallies and protests swelled in size, and the pressure on local officials mounted as citizens demanded justice. And then, just when it seemed like all hope was lost, a breakthrough came. The city's forensic investigation had uncovered irrefutable evidence of the HOA's illegal pesticide use, and the district attorney's office announced that they would be pressing criminal charges. Sarah felt a surge of triumph as the news spread through the community. After months of relentless fighting, the tide had finally turned in their favor. "This is it," she told the cheering crowd gathered outside her home. "We did it. We held the HOA accountable, and we're going to make sure they never pull a stunt like this again." As the crowd erupted in a roar of celebration, Sarah felt a sense of peace wash over her. The battle had been long and arduous, but in the end, justice had prevailed. Her beloved garden may have been lost, but in its place, a stronger, more united community had emerged. And as Sarah looked out over the sea of smiling faces, she knew that this was just the beginning. The fight for justice had only just begun, and she was more ready than ever to take on the next challenge.